Grace Kelly's marriage was much nastier than you thought. Monaco did not just marry Grace Kelly. It used her. Not in the crude way of a villain buying a bride, and not in the simple way gossip likes to describe royal marriages. It used her in the quieter, cleaner, more acceptable way powerful institutions use beautiful women, as image, morality, reassurance, and proof that everything is under control. Grace arrived as a movie star. Monaco turned her into evidence. Evidence that the principality was not just casinos, tax advantages, rich men, old money, and political pressure. Evidence that Prince Rainier had secured the future. Evidence that a tiny country could sell itself to the world as a fairy tale, if the woman at the center smiled beautifully enough. But there was a problem with that fairy tale. It needed Grace Kelly alive as a symbol and silent as a woman. Before Monaco, Hollywood had already taught her that a woman's face could belong to other people. The palace only changed the language. Publicity became duty. Control became dignity. Sacrifice became romance. And the darkest question is not whether Grace loved Rainier. The darkest question is who needed her to keep looking happy after the bargain had already begun to cost her everything. Grace Kelly was not locked in a tower. She was placed inside a role so beautiful that she was almost not allowed to say it hurt. There was no single scandal that swallowed her life in one dramatic moment. Instead, there was a slow conversion. Actress became bride. Bride became princess. Princess became mother of heirs. Mother became national symbol. Symbol became myth. And somewhere beneath all of those names, Grace Kelly kept trying to remain a person. Before she became Princess Grace of Monaco, she was Grace Patricia Kelly from Philadelphia, born in 1929, into a family that looked from the outside like the American answer to old European breeding. The Kellys were Irish Catholic, rich, athletic, ambitious, and deeply aware of every social door that had once been closed to them. Her father, John Brendan Kelly, had made a fortune in brickwork and won Olympic gold medals in rowing. He liked winners. He understood winners. Grace, quieter than her siblings and less naturally suited to the Kelly family's athletic rhythm, learned early that beauty was not the same as approval. That lesson mattered. Grace grew up beautiful, but in her father's world, beauty could look soft. It did not win races. It did not build a business. It did not prove strength. So Grace learned to appear calm while wanting badly to be chosen. That calm became her fortune. It also became her trap. She learned that attention was not power, that good manners could hide cruelty, and that a woman could smile through an insult and save the damage for later. By the time Monaco needed her to look serene, Grace had already been trained by family, class, and ambition to hide the cost of being watched. Acting gave her a place to be seen differently. When Grace left Philadelphia for New York, she did not look like a rebel in the usual sense. She was controlled, well-spoken, and carefully dressed. But leaving was a rebellion all the same. New York gave her distance from the family table. It gave her acting classes, modeling work, auditions, and live television. She learned speed, stillness, discipline, and the power of being watched without giving everything away. Her childhood had already taught her how to hide disappointment. Acting gave that skill a purpose. Grace had a quality the camera loved because it seemed to be keeping a secret. Many beautiful actresses are beautiful in a way that announces itself. Grace was beautiful in a way that invited inspection and then refused to explain. Her face could look serene, but her eyes suggested weather behind the window. That was why the white gloves never felt innocent. They felt like armor. Hollywood in the early 1950s was not a place built to protect a young actress. It was a company town with studio bosses, gossip columnists, contracts, publicity departments, and powerful men who understood the value of a woman's image better than they respected the woman herself. Hollywood taught Grace that beauty was not fully personal property. It was inventory. It taught her that a woman could be praised in public and managed in private. It taught her that silence could be sold as elegance, and that control always sounded better when someone called it protection. So when Grace later entered a palace, the language changed, but the mechanism did not. Publicity became duty. Studio control became royal dignity. The woman at the center was still expected to smile, while other people decided what her image was worth. Her career moved quickly. In High Noon, she played the young Quaker bride opposite Gary Cooper. Then came Mogambo with Clark Gable and Ava Gardner, which brought her an Academy Award nomination. Alfred Hitchcock then framed her with such precision that he helped turn her into a legend. In Dial M for Murder, Rear Window, and To Catch a Thief, he used what fascinated him most: the cool surface, the suggestion of heat beneath it, the perfect manners that made danger more interesting rather than less. Hitchcock did not treat her as a saint. He understood that the perfect surface was only powerful because something underneath seemed controlled, private, and not fully safe. That is where Monaco would misunderstand her. Hollywood sold the tension. Monaco wanted the surface without the tension. It wanted the white gloves, the Catholic polish, the cool face, the public discipline. It did not want the woman who could still disturb a room by wanting something for herself. By 1955, Grace Kelly was one of the most admired actresses in the world. She had won the Academy Award for The Country Girl, a role that asked audiences to accept her as a serious actress. She had proved she was not only a beautiful face. The quiet girl from Philadelphia, the daughter who had not been the obvious champion, now had the golden statue Hollywood used to settle arguments. And yet success did not make Grace free. It made her more valuable to other people. MGM had her under contract. Hitchcock wanted her for more films. Gossip columnists wanted her private life. Grace herself may have seen a hallway narrowing. Fame is not only applause. Fame is a schedule written by other people. It is a body photographed when tired, a smile expected when irritated, a private dinner turned into public property by morning. Grace had worked hard to be seen. Now she was learning that being seen constantly could feel like being handled. Then Monaco appeared. Pressed between France and the sea, it had a palace, a prince, a casino, a cathedral, a national myth, and enough political anxiety to make romance useful. Prince Rainier III had inherited the throne in 1949. He was young, serious, and not naturally sparkling. He understood duty and carried himself with the stiffness of a man born into ceremony. Rainier needed to secure the dynasty. He needed heirs. He also needed Monaco to become something more than a gambling address with a flag. For a prince, being unmarried was not merely a personal detail. It was a national condition. Monaco had arrangements with France that made succession more than a family matter. If the ruling line failed, the future of the principality could become vulnerable. In plain language, Rainier needed a wife not only because a man might want companionship, but because a country wanted a nursery. In May of 1955, Grace traveled to the Cannes Film Festival. The plan for her to meet Prince Rainier was arranged as a publicity opportunity. This was not destiny wandering into a garden. It began as publicity. A magazine wanted an image. A palace needed glamour. A movie star needed seriousness. A prince needed a future. The photograph later became part of the romance, but at the beginning it was also a transaction of attention. Hollywood royalty beside actual royalty. America beside old Europe. A famous woman beside a sovereign who needed the world to look at Monaco differently. The meeting nearly went wrong. There was a power outage at Grace's hotel. Grace arrived late, and Rainier was not pleased. This was not the first sign of a grand passion. It was two disciplined people inconvenienced by electricity. But Grace knew how to perform composure in a situation designed to expose discomfort. Photographers were waiting. Every glance might become a story. Grace did what life had trained her to do. She became still. Rainier was not simply choosing a woman. He was choosing a future image for Monaco. A European aristocratic bride might have satisfied tradition, but tradition alone would not transform a small principality into a modern symbol. An American movie star brought something different. Grace brought Catholic respectability, youth, beauty, discipline, international fame, and access to the American imagination. She was not merely a bride. She was a bridge between old Europe and post-war America, between palace ceremony and cinema fantasy, between Monaco as a gambling resort and Monaco as a household name. Grace, for her part, was not simply swept away. She had conquered Hollywood quickly, but that conquest came with demands she did not entirely love. The studio still owned much of her time. Her private life was becoming public sport. She had won the prize and discovered that winning did not make the room less crowded. A prince offered escape, but not freedom. That distinction is important. After Cannes, Rainier and Grace began corresponding. Letters are dangerous in courtship because they allow people to be more elegant than they are at breakfast. Rainier could appear thoughtful, lonely, serious, and burdened by duty. Grace could appear warm, intelligent, modest, and unlike the Hollywood creatures others imagined. By late 1955, Rainier came to the United States and visited the Kelly family home in Philadelphia. The fairy tale myth, the brickwork dynasty. Jack Kelly was not the sort of father who fainted because a prince entered the room. He had spent his life pushing against men who believed birth outranked achievement. Now a hereditary sovereign had come to ask for his daughter. But the Kellys were practical too. A prince was grand, but Monaco was small. Hollywood was powerful. Grace was earning serious money. Marriage would not simply change her address. It would end her career, or at least that was the expectation. A royal bride could not keep appearing on screen, kissing actors, working under directors, and letting audiences purchase tickets to watch her emotions. A princess belonged to the palace. The woman who had fought to be taken seriously as an artist would have to surrender the work just when she had proved she was more than a pretty face. Grace accepted Rainier's proposal quickly by modern standards, though royal courtships rarely operate on the leisurely calendar of ordinary uncertainty. There were dynastic needs, public relations needs, family expectations, and the intoxicating sense that life had offered her a role larger than any studio could write. She received an engagement ring, then a spectacular diamond ring from Cartier. A diamond is useful in these moments because it gives everyone something to admire, while the actual terms of a woman's future are arranged in quieter rooms. And there were terms. The marriage contract reportedly included a dowry from the Kelly family, often cited as $2 million, an enormous sum at the time. That detail makes the fairy tale harder to keep clean. The public saw the diamond. The palace saw the terms. The newspapers saw romance. The old world saw an American bride arriving with money, beauty, Catholic respectability, and the body expected to secure a dynasty. It does not prove Grace was bought, but it does prove the fairy tale had a price tag. Whether one calls it tradition, expectation, or the price of admission, Grace was entering a system where love, money, bloodline, religion, and public image were being folded into the same marriage. Grace sailed to Monaco in April of 1956 aboard the ocean liner Constitution. The voyage was treated like a floating coronation. The ship carried more than a bride. It carried an American fantasy across the Atlantic: beauty, discipline, Catholic respectability, and good breeding rewarded with a palace. As Monaco prepared to receive her, Grace stood before the cameras looking composed. If she felt fear, she did not donate it to photographers. If she felt grief for the life she was leaving, she folded it behind the smile. Everyone watching thought they were seeing a woman arrive at happiness. They did not understand they were also watching a woman surrender herself to a dream that had already begun making demands. The civil wedding took place on April 18, 1956, in the throne room of the palace. It was formal, legal, and stiff with significance. Rainier stood beside her as sovereign and groom, a combination that rarely gives a woman equal billing. Grace was 26, famous, and newly surrounded by rules that had not been written for her comfort. One day earlier, she had been Grace Kelly, Hollywood star and American citizen. Now she was Her Serene Highness, Princess Grace of Monaco. The religious wedding followed on April 19th at the Cathedral of St. Nicholas. This was the ceremony the world devoured. It had lace, flowers, uniforms, bishops, guests, and a wedding dress that became one of the most famous garments of the 20th century. The dress was designed by Helen Rose, a costume designer from Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer. MGM had dressed Grace for the screen. Now MGM helped dress her for the scene in which she stopped belonging to the screen. The wedding looked like a royal ceremony, but it also behaved like a media production. The dress, the cameras, the global appetite, the official beauty of it all turned her disappearance into content. Hollywood did not just lose Grace Kelly, it monetized the goodbye. Even in that shining cathedral, the bargain was visible for anyone willing to look. Grace was not simply marrying a man. She was being absorbed into a dynasty. The vows joined two people, yes, but they also solved a political problem, refreshed a national image, answered questions of succession, strengthened Monaco's publicity, and gave the world a clean, romantic picture. Everyone wanted the picture. The picture made people happy. The picture sold magazines. The picture made Monaco glow. The picture did not have to live the marriage. The first weeks were not simply romantic escape. They were adjustment. Grace was moving from the quick, artificial intimacy of film sets to the slower, colder intimacy of a court. She had to learn French more seriously. She had to learn protocol, court customs, religious duties, public visits, diplomatic etiquette, and the art of never appearing bored by ceremonies designed by men who rarely worried about entertaining women. She also had to become a wife in private to a man who was not Cary Grant against a Riviera sky. Rainier was intelligent, disciplined, proud, and emotionally guarded. He could be thoughtful. He could also be stern. A prince who spends his life being obeyed may not always remember that marriage is not another department of government. Rainier did not simply have opinions. His preferences came wrapped in tradition and national dignity. If he disliked something, it could sound like Monaco disliked it. This is where the nastiness began, not with one grand explosion, but with 1,000 small reductions. Grace's old life did not disappear in a dramatic puff of smoke. It was taken from her piece by piece, politely. Her film career became impossible. She had left Hollywood before she was ready to be finished, and there is a particular cruelty in being praised for sacrifice by people who never ask what it cost. The world admired her for giving up fame for love, but fame had been her work, her independence, her language, her proof that she was more than a decorative daughter from a rich family. Monaco wanted the value of Grace Kelly without the independence of Grace Kelly. It wanted the fame, but not the work. It wanted the glamour, but not the freedom that had created it. It wanted the woman as proof of modernity, then asked her to live by rules older than almost everyone watching. Monaco benefited from Grace Kelly, but it only wanted to keep Princess Grace. Her official duties began quickly. Monaco needed its new princess visible, charming, and fertile. The principality had placed enormous symbolic weight on the marriage, and the next question arrived with the subtlety of a cannon. When would there be an heir? Women in royal families are often praised as jewels until the wedding, then treated as soil immediately afterward. The language remains elegant. People speak of continuity, blessing, dynasty, and future, but everyone knows what is being measured. After the wedding, Grace's body was no longer fully private. A daughter would be loved. A son would calm the state. Until that son arrived, Grace was not simply a wife learning a new country. She was a woman whose body had become part of Monaco's political future. A princess can be praised as sacred while being treated as infrastructure. On January 23, 1957, Princess Caroline was born. Monaco celebrated. Grace was a new mother in a new country, surrounded by attendants, rituals, advice, and expectations. The birth of Caroline gave Grace a role that was both intimate and public. She could love the child as her own, but the world also loved the child as a dynastic event. Motherhood gave Grace an emotional center inside the palace, a place where duty and love could overlap without entirely strangling each other. But motherhood also tightened the trap. On March 14, 1958, Prince Albert was born. This was the moment Monaco could breathe. Not because Caroline had not been loved, but because love and succession were never the same thing in a dynasty. Albert's birth did not only give Grace a son, it gave Monaco proof that the bargain had worked. Rainier's line was secured. The principality could exhale. Grace had now done the essential royal work. She had married properly, converted her glamour into legitimacy, born a daughter, and born a son. She had given Monaco what it needed most. That did not mean Monaco gave her what she needed. Institutions are often poor at gratitude. They tend to treat miracles as maintenance. Grace was not lazy in any role she accepted. That was part of her tragedy. She suffered because she tried very hard inside arrangements that had no intention of expanding for her. Her relationship with Rainier was not a cartoon of cruelty. It was more complicated and therefore more painful. There was affection. There was attraction. There was shared duty. There were children. There were public triumphs and private tensions. Rainier admired her beauty and understood her usefulness, but usefulness is a dangerous form of admiration. It can begin as gratitude and harden into expectation. Rainier wanted Monaco to become financially stable and internationally respected. He wanted to reduce its dependence on gambling and the old casino image. He worked to bring in business, tourism, development, and a more modern economy. He was not a decorative prince lounging among roses. He took his role seriously. He had pressure from France, investors, old arrangements, and ambitious men who saw Monaco as a profitable stage. He had to manage Aristotle Onassis, who held influence through the company tied to the casino and major properties. Onassis enjoyed Monaco as a glittering playground. Rainier wanted control of his own country. Behind the palace photographs was a harsher question. Who controlled Monaco's future? The prince with the title or the magnate with the money? Onassis understood Monaco as a luxury machine. Rainier wanted it to look like a sovereign state. Grace became useful in that fight because she made Monaco look respectable. She gave a casino principality a family face. She helped make money look moral. Grace entered this world as both wife and asset. Her fame helped Monaco immensely. American tourists, society figures, journalists, and businessmen paid attention because she was there. The marriage turned Monaco into a global symbol of elegance. But being profitable did not mean being powerful. Grace had influence, especially in culture, charity, and social life, but she did not control the central machinery. Rainier was sovereign. Ministers advised, businessmen maneuvered, the court watched. Grace was expected to soften, charm, decorate, represent, and produce. In a room full of men making decisions, she could change the temperature. That is not the same as changing the decision. Her own family was across the ocean. Her closest professional friends belonged to a world she could no longer fully enter. She could not wander through Monaco as an ordinary woman. She was recognized, watched, protected, and contained. Even kindness can become a cage when there is no door. Language deepened the isolation. Grace worked at French, but speaking a language is not the same as dreaming in it, arguing in it, or catching every little blade hidden in a polite sentence. Grace had been judged by Hollywood for being too refined and by aristocrats for having been in Hollywood at all. It is difficult to belong when each world thinks the other has left fingerprints on you. Rainier could be loving, but he was not easy to live beside. He valued order, loyalty, discretion, and the dignity of Monaco. He could be possessive of the institution and by extension possessive of the woman who had become its most famous face. Grace's glamour opened doors for Monaco, but it also threatened to overshadow him. In public, she drew the cameras first. People wanted the princess, the former star, the woman whose face they already loved. Rainier had the throne. Grace had the world's gaze. He needed her celebrity. Yet no man enjoys being treated as an accessory to his own wife, especially when he is also a prince. Grace had to manage not only the public, but the emotional weather around her husband. If she shone too brightly, it could wound him. If she dimmed herself, it wounded her. The children gave the marriage warmth, but they also exposed differences. Grace brought American ideas about affection and family closeness. Rainier came from a world where children of ruling houses were loved, certainly, but also prepared, corrected, and placed into systems early. A royal child is never just a child for long. Carolyn and Albert belonged to their parents, but they also belonged to Monaco's future. Grace wanted to be present. She wanted to be a real mother, not simply a portrait. In the nursery, she tried to protect her children from the machine, but she had been trained by the machine. Her love was real, but the tools she had were control, caution, silence, manners, and fear of scandal. So protection sometimes sounded like punishment. Concern sounded like command. Love arrived in the language of reputation. The public did not want to hear that it was hard. The public had invested too much in the fairy tale. If Grace was unhappy, then the fantasy became rude. So the world preferred not to ask. Her public stillness, once mysterious, began to look like restraint under pressure. She appeared at functions polished and correct, but something in her manner could feel sealed off. It was not the glowing transformation magazines like to describe. It was a woman learning to survive a role that had no intermission. Hitchcock remained fascinated by her absence. He had lost more than an actress. He had lost an image he knew how to use better than anyone. Grace knew this. She knew she had left at the height of her power. There is glamour in leaving before the applause fades. There is grief in wondering what one might have done next. The wound reopened when Hitchcock offered her a way back. In the early 1960s, he wanted Grace for Marne, a dark psychological role about a damaged woman with a secretive past. It was not a decorative comeback. It was not a princess waving politely at the camera. It was a real role, difficult enough to prove that Grace Kelly, the actress, had not died inside Princess Grace. For a moment, the old door opened. Then Monaco began to close it. The problem was not only that Grace would act again, it was what the role represented. Marne was troubled, morally complicated, and far from the clean public image of a Catholic princess and mother of heirs. Different accounts have pointed to public disapproval in Monaco, palace pressure, studio complications, and political sensitivity. That uncertainty matters because no single hand had to slam the door if the entire system was already leaning against it. Grace wanted the role, but palace pressure, public disapproval in Monaco, and the demands of her royal image made the return almost impossible. What should have been a professional decision became a state disturbance. The cruelty of this moment was not loud. It came dressed as dignity, public concern, Catholic propriety, protection of the children, and respect for the throne. That is how powerful systems usually win. They do not say you are not allowed to be yourself. They say this would not be appropriate. Grace Kelly reached for her old life. Princess Grace was told no. That is why Marne matters. It was not just a lost Hitchcock film. It was proof that Grace had not simply retired from acting. She had been converted into something that could not be allowed to act anymore. Monaco did not need to kill the actress. It only needed to make her return look selfish. Grace did not just lose a role. She lost the last clear evidence that Grace Kelly still belonged to herself. Around the same time, Monaco faced outside pressure. In 1962, tensions with France reached a serious point over taxation and sovereignty. France was large. Monaco was small. That sentence contained most of the problem. Grace stood beside Rainier through it, performing the outward calm expected of her. She was no longer an American actress watching European politics from a hotel balcony. She was part of a sovereign house under pressure. Her children represented its future. Her image helped soften Monaco abroad. Her life had become inseparable from decisions made by men in offices, ministries, banks, and palace rooms. That was Grace's strange political function. She was not signing treaties. She was not negotiating tax rules. She was not drawing up reforms. but she made Monaco harder to dismiss as a loophole with a flag. She gave the principality a human face, a Catholic princess, a mother of heirs, a woman the American public still felt it knew. Her presence softened what money made suspicious. She helped turn a principality built around casinos, banking, tourism, and old privilege into something that could be photographed as domestic, moral, and almost innocent. In 1965, Princess Stephanie was born. By then, the family looked complete from the outside. Caroline, the firstborn daughter, Albert, the necessary heir, Stephanie, the youngest child. But families are not paintings. They keep shifting after the frame is chosen. The children grew under glass. Caroline became strong-willed, glamorous, and restless. Albert carried the quiet burden of being the future ruler. Stephanie, lively and observant, watched her older siblings fight with expectation before she had the words for it. Grace loved her children urgently, but she could not give them the one thing she had never fully had in Monaco, a life not owned by public meaning. A royal child with bad posture could become a moral collapse by breakfast in certain circles. Between Rainier's dynastic standards and Grace's anxious protection, the children inherited affection, pressure, silence, and a name that belonged partly to Monaco before it belonged to them. Caroline made this pain visible first. By the 1970s, she was young, beautiful, restless, and watched with a hunger that made even Grace's old Hollywood publicity seem polite. The world no longer wanted only royal elegance. It wanted royal trouble. Caroline gave them material not because she was wicked or foolish in any simple way, but because she was a young woman trying to breathe inside a family where every breath could be interpreted. Grace understood the danger. She knew how a pretty young woman could be turned into a story before she had finished deciding who she was. But understanding a daughter does not always make a mother gentle. Sometimes it makes her afraid, and fear in family life often dresses itself as control. Caroline wanted movement, Grace wanted caution, Rainier wanted discipline, Monaco wanted dignity, the press wanted pictures. Caroline married Philippe Junot in 1978. The wedding was beautiful because royal weddings are very good at making hesitation look like blessing. 22 years earlier, Grace had been the bride entering the cathedral while the world praised her fortune. Now her own daughter was doing something similar, though in a different emotional register, not marrying into a throne, but marrying out of the emotional grip of one. The marriage quickly proved unhappy. It did not give Caroline the freedom she had imagined. It gave her new scrutiny, new gossip, and a husband who did not fit easily into the role Monaco needed from him. The civil divorce came. For a Catholic royal family, divorce was not only personal sadness, it was a religious and dynastic difficulty wrapped in headlines. Grace knew how institutions could take a woman's private heartbreak and process it like paperwork. Caroline's failed marriage changed Grace's public role. She was no longer only the perfect princess and mother of heirs. She was the mother of a daughter whose personal life had become international entertainment. The fairy tale of Monaco began to look less like a perfect family portrait and more like a real family under glass. Grace's own loneliness became sharper because her public life remained so successful. By any outside measure, she had achieved a remarkable transformation. She had become a respected princess, a mother of three, a cultural patron, a charitable leader, and one of the most recognizable women in the world. But success can be a poor witness for the defense. It tells everyone the case is closed, while the person inside is still giving testimony. The nastiness of the marriage was not that every day was miserable. That would be easier to condemn and easier to dismiss. The nastiness was that the marriage took Grace's finest qualities and used them against her. Her discipline made her endure. Her beauty made her useful. Her manners made her silence believable. Her loyalty made leaving unimaginable. Her motherhood made rebellion costly. Her fame made honesty dangerous. Her desire to be worthy, planted long ago in Philadelphia, made her keep trying to earn approval from a world that had already taken too much. And yet she continued to create meaning. She gave herself to charity, to art, to her children, to Monaco's public life. People who met her often remembered her kindness, not as performance, but as attention. That mattered. A trapped woman is still a woman with agency, tenderness, intelligence, and choices, even if all of them are narrowed. Grace was especially drawn to artists because they reminded her of the life where feeling had a place to go. Musicians, actors, dancers, poets, and designers brought air into rooms sealed by protocol. She supported performances and artistic institutions because she believed in them and because they allowed her to keep speaking the language of creation without openly defying the life that had forbidden her to create in the old way. When she read poetry aloud, the old actress breathed through the princess. The voice remained. The timing remained. The ability to hold a room remained. She could not return fully to film, but she found small ways to touch the stage again. She could perform as long as the performance looked like service. She could be heard as long as the hearing did not threaten the official role. She could touch the old life only if the new life could rename the gesture as duty. By the early 1980s, Grace was no longer the young bride the world had watched sail into the harbor. She was a woman in her 50s, a mother of 3, a princess for more than 2 decades, and a public figure whose image had become almost impossible to separate from the country itself. Monaco had changed around her. Rainier had modernized it, defended it, expanded it, and made it more secure. Grace had helped make that transformation look human. But the private cost had not disappeared. It had only become harder to photograph. Grace had learned to function inside the role so well that suffering could pass for composure. She knew how to enter a room, honor a guest, comfort a donor, stand beside Rainier, protect her children in public, and keep family strain from becoming state embarrassment. She had become expert at the life that had narrowed her. That is one of the crueler achievements demanded of women in powerful families, to become brilliant at surviving the thing that consumes them. In September 1982, Grace was staying at Rock Eagle, the family's country retreat above Monaco. On September 13th, Grace and Stephanie left Rock Eagle by car. Grace was driving. Stephanie was with her. It should have been an ordinary journey, one of those small movements in family life that history usually ignores. A mother and daughter in a car, a mountain road, a destination waiting below. But some lives are so heavily watched that even an ordinary drive can become the final scene the world replays for decades. The car left the road on the descent toward Monaco. Early reports were confused, as they often are when tragedy arrives faster than fact. Grace was gravely injured. Stephanie survived with injuries. The news traveled quickly, and once again the private pain of the Grimaldi family became public property before the family itself could understand what had happened. The official account pointed to Grace suffering a medical event at the wheel with reports later focusing on a stroke or cerebral hemorrhage as the cause of the crash. Stephanie denied the rumor that she had been driving. There is no responsible way to turn that rumor into fact, but there is a responsible way to ask why the rumor became so powerful. Even at 17, injured beside her dying mother, Stephanie was not allowed to be only a daughter in shock. She became a question mark. That is what makes the rumor so cruel. Its power was not evidence. Its power was appetite. People wanted a darker story because the official tragedy felt too sudden, too clean, too unbearable. A medical event was sad. A mother losing control of a car was tragic. But rumor gave the public something uglier to handle, something that could be argued over and whispered about. Stephanie's grief was not enough for them. They wanted suspicion too. Grace died the next day on September 14th, 1982. The woman who had been sold to the world as a living fairy tale was gone, and almost immediately the machinery of memory began to work. Tributes were full of beauty, dignity, elegance, motherhood, service, and romance. Those words were not false. Grace had been beautiful. She had been dignified. She had served Monaco. She had loved her children. She had built charities, supported the arts, and given the principality a face the world adored. But public mourning often cleans what it cannot face. The tributes remembered Princess Grace because Princess Grace was easier to mourn than Grace Kelly, the trapped artist. Grace, the woman who had lost a career. Grace, the mother who had watched her children inherit the same machinery. Grace, the wife whose usefulness had become inseparable from affection. Grace, the symbol who had spent decades trying to remain a person underneath the title. Rainier was devastated. Whatever had been difficult in the marriage, his grief was real. That matters because the story is not strong if it turns him into a simple villain. The darker truth is more complicated. He loved her and benefited from the role that consumed her. He depended on her and limited her. He admired her and needed her to remain useful. Human beings can do damage without becoming monsters. Institutions can use love as a cover without making the love fake. After Grace died, Monaco did what powerful places often do after a woman has given them everything. It polished her. Death became the final publicist. It removed inconvenience, softened conflict, and turned a complicated woman into an image the world could mourn without discomfort. The bride returned. The white gloves returned. The cool Hitchcock blonde returned. The princess on the balcony returned. The mother with the children returned. But the woman who had missed her work, feared for her daughters, negotiated her husband's authority, and searched for small ways back to herself became harder to see. Caroline, Albert, and Stephanie inherited more than grief. They inherited a public story already written before they could correct it. Caroline was no longer only the rebellious daughter who had married badly and learned painfully. She was the eldest child of the dead princess, expected to carry elegance through her own losses and scandals. Albert was not only the heir, he was the son whose birth had once reassured Monaco that the bargain had succeeded. Stephanie was not only the injured teenager who survived the crash, she became the shadow in the passenger seat, the girl the public kept turning into a question. Over time, the official memory of Grace became cleaner and cleaner. The actress became the princess. The princess became the icon. The icon became the fairy tale. Her films remained, but they were often treated as a glamorous prologue to the real story, as if the point of Grace Kelly's career had been to prepare her for a wedding. That is one of the quiet insults hidden inside admiration. The world praised her as if marriage had completed her, when in truth it had also interrupted her. The woman who won an Academy Award at 25 was turned in memory into the woman who gave it all up for love. That sentence sounds romantic until one asks, who benefits from telling women that surrender is the highest form of fulfillment? Grace's sacrifice made the public feel good because it suggested that a woman could trade ambition for status and be rewarded with meaning. But her life asked a colder question. What if the reward was also the trap? That is why Marne still haunts the story. Not because one lost film would have saved her life. Marne matters because it showed the locked door. Grace reached for her old profession, and the world around her decided that the role of princess mattered more than the person who missed being an artist. Her return did not have to be banned with cruelty. It only had to be made inappropriate. That word can ruin a woman more quietly than any scandal. And this is why the dowry matters too. Not because it proves Grace was bought, and not because it erases love from the marriage. It matters because it reveals the bargain beneath the lace. Money moved. Titles moved. Public image moved. A Hollywood star became a royal wife. An American family entered European nobility. A small principality gained global attention. A prince secured heirs. Everyone could point to romance because romance made the transaction easier to bless. The public preferred the blessing. It still does. People like the version where Grace Kelly, already beautiful and famous, was chosen by a prince and lifted into a higher life. That version is clean. It comforts. It asks very little. The darker version asks more. It asks whether Grace was lifted or transferred, whether she escaped Hollywood or entered an older image machine, whether the palace saved her from fame or found a more permanent use for it, whether a woman can be loved and still be used so thoroughly that even her pain becomes part of the decoration. The answer is uncomfortable because it does not cancel the beauty. The wedding was beautiful. The children were loved. The charities mattered. The marriage had affection. Monaco was not imaginary. Rainier's grief was real. Grace's dignity was real. Her service was real. But none of those truths erase the other truth. The fairy tale worked best when Grace's private cost remained unreadable. Grace was not destroyed by one man, one marriage, one palace, or one accident. She was consumed by every system that needed her to look blessed. Hollywood used her face. Monaco used her silence. The press used her marriage. The public used her fairy tale. And every time she seemed close to becoming herself again, someone found a prettier word for no. Duty, dignity, tradition, protection, appropriateness. Those words did not sound violent. That was their power. Grace Kelly's life still haunts because it exposes a bargain the world continues to offer women. Be admired enough, and people will call it freedom. Be useful enough, and people will call it love. Disappear beautifully enough, and people will call it destiny. But Grace was never only the woman in the wedding dress. She was never only the Hitchcock blonde. She was never only the princess on the balcony or the mother in the official photograph. She was the woman behind all of those images, still trying to breathe through them. Maybe that is the final truth the fairy tale cannot survive. The cage did not look like a cage. It looked like a palace.